Hey, good morning again. It's Julian from Motorize, your electric vehicle store. We get to video and drive today. I've got a high-tech setup. My phone's attached to the rear view mirror, hands-free, so I can just babble and drive at the same time. So what I want to talk about is getting the absolute most amount of range out of your electric vehicle. Lots of customers on the road are driving the original 24 kilowatt-hour Nissan Leafs. Probably the most amazing EV ever. It's my personal favorite, although I do also love stuff like the Tesla Model 3. I've got a soft spot in my heart for Nissan Leafs because they're awesome and cheap. So rain, cold weather, high-speed driving, there's a bunch of contributing factors that reduce the efficiency of an electric vehicle. And I think it's important to bring to drivers' attention the amount of change you can see in a vehicle's potential range is like really adversely affected by the driver's driving style. So for example, I have noticed that if you're doing highway driving and you choose to cruise at 90 or 100 kilometers an hour as opposed to 80 kilometers an hour, you might be using as much as 20% more energy per kilometer than you actually need to, which gets us onto the idea of saving energy when we're cruising around at lower speed in the city. Some drivers, such as Andrew from Gia Zone Couriers in Victoria, who drives a fleet of pure electric vehicles to do his daily business, I call him the mile master. He's been able to get well over 400 kilometers out of a Chevrolet Bolt. He just bought 2 new ones for his fleet. He and his staff are really good at getting incredible range out of electric vehicles, and there's a couple of secrets that they and all the other mile masters on the road pay attention to. So number one, to maximize this range that you can get out of your EV, first of all, look after the basic stuff like making sure your tires are properly inflated. Some people go higher than the manufacturer's recommended tire pressure, which in a Leaf is 36 psi. I don't recommend going higher. If you do, you might get a little bit more range, but you might compromise traction. So to me, that's not a good trade-off. Stick with the manufacturer's recommended spec, but at least make sure they're up to the factory spec. Second, you want to take off as gently as possible from any stop, whether it's a stop sign or a stoplight or whatever, regardless of the driving situation, unless you have to accelerate to get out of somebody's way for safety reasons. Take off in a soft and easygoing manner. If you've ever driven a Tesla on autopilot or a BMW i3 or even a new Leaf with the e-pedal or whatever they call it, you'll notice that if the vehicle's pacing the car ahead and the car ahead starts to move after a stop sign or stoplight, your car, which is set to follow, will take off at a really gradual and easy pace and will not be depressing the accelerator or using any excess energy whatsoever to get the car going. One of the areas that that vehicles can save a lot of energy is when you're actually getting the vehicle into motion from a complete stop. So in the name of efficiency, take off with the least amount of pedal pressure possible. If you're driving a Nissan Leaf and you're accustomed to looking at the orbs on the top of your lower dash display, try to use no more than 2 when you're cruising and no more than 3 when you're accelerating. The orbs indicate whether you're using power or you're regenerating power to put back in the battery when you're decelerating. 2 orbs for cruising. If you want to do over 100 on the highway, kilometers an hour that is, you're probably going to be into 3 orbs, but it depends on the terrain and the road condition and winds and all that other stuff. So you want to save energy, make sure that you don't use more than 2 to 3 orbs at a time. If you notice routinely while you're driving that you are using more than you should be, then just get in the habit of lifting your foot out of the accelerator so that you can probably maintain the same speed or the desired speed that you'd like to travel, but you don't have to use as much energy. Always lift your foot out of the accelerator unless you need to be going faster than you are currently going. You'll be surprised how much range you can actually save by following that advice. Another important consideration for maximizing the range in your electric vehicle of any kind is try not to use the brake pedal if you can avoid it. That doesn't mean that you should put yourself into a dangerous situation by deliberately avoiding the brakes when they should be used, but the regenerative braking capability on every electric vehicle on the road right now is meaningful, and it's a good way of smoothing out your driving. If you become accustomed to taking your foot off the accelerator in advance of the red light or the stop sign, maybe instead of jamming on your brakes when you're 50 meters from the stop sign, instead of touching the brakes, maybe let your foot off the accelerator, 150 meters prior to the stop sign. Or if you're driving a Model S or an X or a BMW i3 with a more aggressive regenerative braking system, you can remove your foot from the accelerator a little later, and the vehicle will bring you to a complete stop or very close to a complete stop with lots of room to spare. So by doing that and avoiding the use of friction brakes, you allow for maximum regenerative braking, and that is how you can also achieve longer range in the vehicle by putting as much energy back into the battery rather than using the hydraulic brakes, which turns that energy into heat, which you lose. So you don't want to lose the energy like a gas car does. That's why you bought an EV in the first place, to be more energy efficient. So reclaim as much energy as you possibly can by just lifting off the accelerator when you want to slow down for a stop or just in traffic or for any reason. That covers most of the basics. Don't worry about headlights, don't worry about wipers and all that stuff. Heated seats and all that. You can use those things all you want. You know, Tesla warns you that if you leave the car turned on with the headlights on, it's going to use a little extra power, and yes, it probably will. But to put everything into perspective, you know, most Teslas use a 360 kilowatt motor. Well, it depends on the model, or 320. So a seat heater draws about 40 watts. Headlights, each one draws about 55 watts on high beam and 60 watts on low beam, somewhere around there. If they're LEDs or HIDs, they might draw a little less. But so, you know, if you turn on your headlights, one headlight at 60 watts would use 60 watt hours in an hour, in 1 hour. Anyway, they hardly draw anything. It's almost immeasurably small. If you really want to save energy, you're going to save it with your right foot rather than turning off all the functions in the car. You know, I've seen people that don't want to drive with their stereo too loud because they're concerned it's going to use too much power. Forget it. Play the stereo all you want. Turn on your wipers. Use your heat all you want, but you should use your heat sparingly, actually. The heaters in these cars, in Nissan Leafs, can draw as much as 6,000 watts. So that's 6 kilowatts. So if the heater's cranked, it will use as much energy as a level 2 charger can put into the car while you're plugged in. So that's a fair bit of power. That's 50 kilometers an hour of range that you can spend on the heater if you're using it to its maximum potential. So by all means, be gentle with the heat. If you can live at 19 degrees, don't set it to 22. It's going to make a difference. Also, you might find comfort in knowing that you can turn the heat on for maybe 1 or 2 minutes when you first jump in the car, but you might not need to leave it on all the time. If you're driving a bigger battery car, you know, if you've got 60, 80, 100 kilowatt hours of energy stored in the battery, well, using your heater for the duration of your trip means nothing. It's insignificant. But, you know, older, small Kia Souls, Nissan Leafs, smart EVs, and other low-range, shorter range EVs, yeah, you definitely want to monitor the energy consumption when range matters. If you're only doing a 20 kilometer an hour or 20 kilometer trip to work and back every day, use all the heat you want. It makes no difference because you're going to plug in when you get home. If you have workplace charging, use all the heat you want. Same thing, makes no difference because you're going to top up at work. And speaking of that, if you don't have workplace charging, talk to your employer, boss, whatever, and tell them that you're trying to support a clean lifestyle, and that means driving an electric car, and you sure like to be able to charge at work. Employers spend all sorts of money to keep customers happy. Staff retention is a big deal these days. And EV chargers at work is a great way to make staff feel right at home when they have the opportunity to plug in their electric car at work. Looks good for the business. It feels good for the employees too. Anyway, I hope I've been able to share some good news about efficiency when driving electric today. Hope you've learned something. I always learn something every time I drive an EV, so let's keep up the good work, team. All right. Thanks again for watching. Follow our YouTube channel if you like. It's Motorize, your electric vehicle store in lovely Victoria, British Columbia, Canada.